Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. It's a tale of contrast and it could not be more stark. On the one hand, Captain Amrinder Singh, Congress veteran of more than 40 years, he's been a multiple-term chief minister. He is ousted in the most unceremonious of fashions. So much so, today, a day after meeting Union Home Minister Amit Shah, he says on the record that he will quit the Congress out of this humiliation but will not join the BJP. Now, on the other hand, Navjot Singh Sidhu, who threw a hissy fit, a tantrum if you will, just 48 hours ago, he has been accommodated, and how? In fact, the Congress leadership, the incumbent chief minister in Punjab have all gone out of their way to accommodate Mr. Sidhu's demands. Never mind, in the process, he has undermined a sitting chief minister, and that too a sitting Dalit chief minister. Does the Congress leadership have different rules for different folks? Well, ask Kapil Sibal, because there were people protesting and throwing eggs and tomatoes outside his house yesterday because he dared to ask questions of the Congress leadership.
Less than 24 hours after his meeting with Amit Shah and NSA Ajit Doval, Captain Amrinder Singh dropped a bombshell on the Congress. I will resign from the Congress, he said. I will not take this humiliation and insult.
Number one, I am not going to remain in the Congress. Sidhu is not the right man for Punjab, and अगर वो लड़ेगा, जहाँ से भी लड़ेगा, मैं उसको नहीं जीतने दूँगा.
So, is something cooking with the BJP? The captain, a chef par excellence, kept it clear. I'm not joining the BJP, he said.
I am not joining the BJP.
But never say never in politics, which is why the Congress deployed Kamal Nath to calm the captain down. It didn't work. The captain struck where it hurts. He said he had no intentions of continuing in the Congress, which was going downhill. This heavy firing at a party that he has served for over 40 years is unlikely to be his political swan song. It is unlikely that he will make the Congress's life easy by retiring. Meanwhile, his nemesis, Navjot Singh Sidhu, came out of his Kop Bhavan in Patiala and drove all the way to Chandigarh for a truce meeting with Chief Minister Charanjit Channi. After 3 hours, there was a truce. Mr. Sidhu is back in business. But wiser perhaps that his biggest backers, the Gandhis, are unwilling to tolerate his loose cannon behavior anymore. Drop the tantrum or we will drop you was the clear message that was conveyed from Delhi to Patiala as Mr. Sidhu sulked. In the end, he didn't really have a choice. So is all well that ends well? With elections in Punjab in 5 months and Mr. Sidhu's ambitions of being the next chief minister, the Punjab thriller is nowhere near its climax. In New Delhi, I'm Shreya Dhondial.
All right, the Punjab thriller nowhere close to its climax, but what is the message that the Congress leadership is sending out to the rank and file in just the manner in which they've dealt with these two gentlemen, Amrinder Singh on the one hand and Navjot Singh Sidhu on the other? Dilip Charan is founder and consulting partner with Perfect Relations. Vinod Sharma is a senior editor with the Hindustan Times newspaper. Aparajita Sarangi, spokesperson of the BJP, will be joining us, and Pallavi Ghosh is senior editor, CNN News18 tracking politics. Pallavi, I'll start with you. I mean, there couldn't be a bigger contrast in the way in which the Congress leadership has treated Amrinder Singh and now Sidhu with his hissy fit over the last 48 hours. It seems like at least 2 out of the 3 conditions that he laid down, the leadership is willing to accede to.
Well, I mean, Zaka, when they decided to make someone who was an outsider and someone few years into the Congress party as the PCC chief, despite the fact that Captain was vociferously against it, I think the Congress leadership made it very clear whose side they were on. Now, here was a very a situation of a great dilemma, really, for the Congress leadership. Because the points which Sidhu was raising seemed to be very valid, and points on which the Congress party had hinged a change of guard on, which is the anti-corruption stand, and also we are going to ensure justice as far as the sacrilege issue issue is concerned. Now, Sidhu very smartly raises these 2 points, which means you oppose him on these 2 grounds, you're going to look horrible. That's one problem which the Congress leadership faced at the centre. But on the other hand, backtracking also means that the CM ends up looking a little weak.
Exactly.
And if this coordination starts getting formed, I'm sure, Zaka, there's going to be a day-to-day friction. There's not going to ever be a perfect synergy. And at some point of time, the Chief Minister will feel that, listen, I am the head of the government, I should also be calling the shots.
No, absolutely. I think what Mr. Sidhu has done, and frankly what the Congress leadership by acceding to his demands has done, is to make the Chief Minister look absolutely weak. Vinod Sharma, who is inducted into the cabinet, who is picked as DGP of the state, who is picked as Advocate General, the final authority is the Chief Minister. Here you have a very peculiar situation where a PPCC chief, I'm not saying he's not an important person in Punjab politics, but somebody who's not in government seems to have the veto power. Isn't the Congress undermining its own Chief Minister by acceding to Sidhu's demands?
Well, of course it has undermined its own Chief Minister. And Mr. Sidhu too has undermined himself. For him to go public with his protests and taking exception to certain appointments by the Chief Minister, he could have picked up the phone, they could have thrashed this out behind closed doors. But the very fact that he went public with his protests was an indication, was proof that he was trying to overwhelm the Chief Minister. He tries to show that he's the super CM there, he's the de facto power. And I think that is the biggest problem. Mr. Sidhu is not cut out to be a leader of men. I'm sorry to say this. It's a very sweeping statement. But if you will go ahead and you will see him closely, he is unable to take people along with him.
Yeah.
And there's an entire history to prove that. Now, in this case, the Chief Minister was in his camp.
Correct.
Mr. Sukhjinder Randhawa was in his camp. And today he has problems with both. He has problems with Randhawa because he has got home. Earlier, he scuttled Randhawa from becoming Chief Minister. And now he's undermining the man who's become Chief Minister. And he's actually undoing a very, very creative social first, which the party would manage amid all the confusion by installing a scheduled caste Chief Minister.
No, I agree with you. Because
he's fighting for himself.
Ever since Mr. Channi got selected as the Chief Minister, and let's face it, he was probably not the number 1 or number 2 choice. He was probably the number 3 or number 4 choice in the state. Aparajita Sarangi, the Congress has been trying to make a virtue out of this necessity, a virtue out of a pretty bad situation by saying we have instilled the first Dalit Chief Minister of Punjab, right? Great, which is fantastic. But look at the events of the last 48 hours. By acceding to what Mr. Sidhu has asked for, which purely falls in the domain and the prerogative of the executive, and in this case, the buck stops with the Chief Minister, they are undermining their very own sort of fact that they are tom-tomming that we instilled the first Dalit Sikh Chief Minister of Punjab. And Dalits of Punjab are watching this. What is the message that they will take away? They will take away the message that Mr. Channi is merely a puppet. Mr. Sidhu is the one who's pulling the strings from behind.
Well, that was stated as
Aparajita Sarangi.
A political circus is going on in Punjab, and it's extremely sad for all of us, those who are associated with politics and those who are not. All the citizens of the country, I would say, are not amused. They are sad. This is not the kind of leadership that we want in a particular state. Think of the people of Punjab. In fact, they have been humiliated by this kind of leadership at the state level. Now, if you ask me, I would hold the so-called high command sitting in Delhi completely responsible for the kind of situation that is in Punjab today. The leadership style of the Congress in Delhi smacks of immaturity, inexperience and ignorance. And none other than Captain Amrinder Singh 2 days back had said this, that the Congress leadership in Delhi actually is politically inexperienced, and that is why these things are happening. And think of G22. I will not call them G23 because Jitin Prasad is out. G22. In fact, all these senior leaders have rightly, I mean, if they feel it is true, they have been humiliated, and whatever Kapil Sibal ji says is absolutely right. So I think now in this situation, the way Navjot Singh Sidhu is behaving is, I would say, ridiculous. And how is it that we are trying to placate, or rather the Congress leadership is trying to placate Navjot Singh Sidhu?
Correct.
Who is Mr. Channi? Channi is the chief executive of the state of Punjab. Now he has all the authority to select his team members.
Absolutely.
Whether it be the Council of Ministers or the Advocate General or the DGP. None other than the Chief Minister has the right to select.
No,
now, this is
and
the kind
if
of
there needs to
blackmailing that
be,
we were
if there
actually
needs
afraid
to
of, and
be
this has
a
started.
course correction,
Absolutely.
fair enough. Maybe Mr. Sidhu has a point. I'm not disputing that. But if
Yes.
there needs to be a course correction, the course correction has to come from the Chief Minister. It should not come from
Absolutely.
outside of government.
Absolutely.
Dilip Charan, the bigger problem
True.
for the Congress party
True.
is this. They can't seem to make up their mind on how to deal with this problem. Till yesterday, we were told, and Pallavi will bear me out on this, the High Command is not interested in placating Sidhu. That's why they're not sending any central representatives. They've given him an ultimatum to decide whether he wants to take back his resignation. If not, they're looking at other possible contenders, front runners, names were floated, etc., etc. And today, within 24 hours, for no explicable reason, 2 out of 3 demands that Mr. Sidhu has placed has been acceded to. I mean, this is not just confused thinking, this is also confused messaging.
Of the Congress. What is happening is that you are destroying the fundamental basis on which the Congress exists, which is that we attempt to run a democratic party. Now, the problem is that when you're running a democratic party, you may well have people say that people lost confidence, the MLAs lost confidence in Captain Amrinder Singh, so a new chief minister was needed to be placed. Now they will justify this, saying it is the chief minister who acceded to Mr. Sidhu's demands. The fact is that imagery is all wrong. The imagery is that you have a chief minister who's being overruled by a party functionary who chose to quit and then chose to come back. So, what are you left with? When Mr. Sidhu has sent his resignation to Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, it is only Mrs. Sonia Gandhi who can say, I have chosen not to accept your resignation. So there is no way that decision making in Delhi can divorce itself from decision making in Punjab. And I think that what is happening is when the Congress is creating for itself damage, it may have, Channi leading a government which may have an appeal as far as the elections go. But what is the resultant image on the Congress, which is larger than just one election result or two?
No,
So,
absolutely. I think forget about the Dalit chief minister. Any chief minister being undermined in this fashion, and that too 3 months before a poll, people of Punjab are watching. They will draw the necessary conclusions. But I want to go back to Pallavi. It's not just what's happening in Punjab. Look at what happened yesterday with Kapil Sibal. He makes a statement. Yes, one could argue, he should have made it within closed corridors. Maybe those comments should not have been made in public. And then the Congress workers themselves go and, throw eggs and throw tomatoes and do hi outside Kapil Sibal's house for a man who I'm sure, had he not defended so many of the cases that the Congress party has faced over the years, many congressmen would be in jail today.
Not only that, he was a firefighter when the Congress UPA 2 rather was facing the Anna Hazare, Baba Ramdev. And I remember I was reporting from there when Kapil Sibal would spend hours and hours and late into a night trying to placate Baba Ramdev and also Anna Hazare. But many would argue then, Zaka, that's his job as a Congress leader. He had to do this because he was a minister in the union cabinet at that point of time. But see, here's the thing. The argument which is being given by many members of G23 is that you're calling us Gaddar. You're saying, why couldn't you raise it behind closed doors? They are saying we did. We wrote that letter to Mrs. Gandhi a year back. We didn't leak out the contents of the letter. We asked for a CWC meeting. At the CWPC meeting, it was selectively leaked out to the media by the members of the so-called loyalists. And you've been for 1.5 years promising us that elections are going to take place. And guess what happens? By late evening, a short while back, Randeep Surjewala responds to the G23 press conference by saying we are acceding to the demands and we're going to call call a CWC soon. But what's even worse, Aka, is that till now no one has really condemned what happened outside Mr. Kapil Sibbal's residence. No one officially from the Congress party. It's only the so-called G23 members and Mr. Chidambaram, who's not G23 but someone who's been a very close colleague of Mr. Sibbal, who's condemned it, and he goes to the extent of saying that perhaps silence is the best refuge to take.
No, but let's take a step back, and I'm just trying to see what is going on here as far as the Congress leadership is concerned. How are they viewing this entire thing? And Vinod Sharma, if their point of view is, look, the time has come to get rid of some of the old brass, whether it is G23 or others. In the case of Punjab, they got rid of a 79-year-old chief minister who's now made way for a 56, 57-year-old chief minister. They could likely do the same thing in Rajasthan as well. The time has come for the old generation to be weeded out, and if in the process there is a bit of a bloodbath, then so be it. People will forget this story 6 months from now. Is that the calculated call that's been taken?
I don't think there is any calculation in this call, if this is the call. Amrinder Singh made a very interesting remark today. He said in the Sikh tradition, there is a Buddha Dal and there is a Taruna Dal. The task of the Buddha Dal is to plan and to, on the strength of their experience, to show the way forward. And the Taruna Dal executes and moves forward. Now, that could have been perhaps a template, and that is indeed a template for any democratic party to have a generational transition. Congress party has adopted a sledgehammer way of cutting aside the senior people in order to promote the junior lot, the younger people.
Yeah.
There is no harm. I mean, every party requires fresh blood, young blood. But this is not the way to do it. The kind of treatment that was meted out to Amrinder Singh, I think is a shame for any party of the stature and of the history of the Congress.
No, but to play devil's advocate, they would turn around and say, but he was refusing to go. I mean, there were internal surveys done where he was seemingly unpopular. He was not acting in the Bargadi case. He was not acting against the Badals. Nothing about Bargadi, drugs. And he was refusing to leave. So what do you do?
I agree that he did not move adequately enough on the Bargadi case, and which was a very emotive issue in the countryside in Punjab. That is a fact. And when you take that forward, you tend to agree with Sidhu when he said that why have you appointed these people? Because our revolt against Amrinder Singh was to get this system out of place and put a new system which would deliver on our promises of 2017. Now that has happened. That is a dispute which is being resolved between the CM and him. What I am trying to tell you is that the Congress party was very ham-handed and insensitive, if I dare say, in handling the Amrinder issue. It is being equally insensitive in dealing with the G22 or 23, whatever you want to call them. I don't call them a rebel group. I call them a ginger group. That is a group you should look forward to. They are the people with wealth of experience. You use them, you deploy them, rather than eliminate them from the system and without having adequately good replacements.
Okay.
Now you tell me one thing, is there any one leader in Parliament, some of the leading the participants in the debates was Kapil Sibal, Chidambaram, Abhishek Singhvi. Now Chidambaram made a tweet today. Kapil Sibal is unhappy. There has been a protest outside his house. I mean, they are behaving as if we are in Sanjay Gandhi's days, And those were different days when Congress was a party at the pinnacle, and you could do it and get away with it.
Now you can't.
You can't be doing it in your sorry state,
today,
in your most enfeebled state.
Today, for example, the Congress party in Uttar Pradesh, I mean, if they come as a number 4, that would be a big deal. I mean, that would be something to write home about. But be that as it may, Aparajita Sarangi, what the Congress is saying is, at least in our party, we have this friction, we have, both internal meetings, people have the freedom to even go public like Kapil Sibal has. In your party, there is no such thing. I mean, people feel suffocated. They just have to listen to everything that's been told to them. How do you respond to that, ma'am?
Not at all. I would definitely like to put forth very candidly that as far as our party is concerned, never say that there is suffocation of any sort. We are Karyakarta based party. We come from below, we rise to the top by dint of hard work, by dint of merit. So I think there is a lot of emphasis on merit, lot of emphasis on talent, and our party has the knack of picking up talents from all over. You can see
which is
in
fair
all the
enough, but
states,
when you change
good
the
people
Gujarat
are
Chief
brought
Minister,
out.
for example, ma'am, when you
Yes.
change the Gujarat Chief Minister, for example, can you elaborate for our viewers, I mean, how democratic that process was?
See, we are an extremely democratic party. There is absolutely no suffocation at all, and there is discipline. If you kind of, mistake discipline by saying authoritarianism, I think that is your fault.
Okay.
And as far as Gujarat Chief Minister is concerned, Vijay Rupani was there in the chair for 5 years, don't forget that.
Sure.
And it is a Karyakarta-based party. We give chances to everybody. Now here, let me come to Punjab. Just give me 30 seconds. I have been listening to the Congress people throughout the day. The Congress people, under the present circumstances, have got a very sorry figure, and that is why they are saying that they have put a Dalit Chief Minister in the seat of the Chief Minister. It's so very sad. Why do we call Mr. Channi as a Dalit Chief Minister? Let's not prefix the word Dalit. Let's call him the Chief Minister. It's a responsibility for good governance sake. It's a responsibility of the Congress leadership
very humbly,
at the center
very
to
humbly,
ensure that
very
the
humbly.
institution of the Chief Minister
I agree with
is
you in part.
strengthened.
Yes, Mr. Channi will be judged on the work that he does, not the caste that he hails from. But, this caste politics is something that all parties play. I mean, when you changed the Gujarat Chief Minister, you made it a point to say that he was a
okay.
Patidar Chief Minister. He was the
I'm
first
saying-
Kadwa Patel to become Chief Minister. Be that as may, that is, all political parties play that. That's fine. That's a reality of Indian politics. What I want to know from Dilip Cherian, though, is this. Who now takes this Congress leadership seriously when they've created a mess in Punjab? It's now become like an internecine feud almost. They've removed a long-serving chief minister in a very, very, unceremonious fashion. Yes, and they've decided to throw their lot with a man who is so mercurial that even he doesn't know what his next move is going to be. Nonetheless, they've still decided to placate him and accede to his demands. Tomorrow, who's to say Mr. Sidhu will not revolt again? Tomorrow, it could be anything else.
By the standards of loyalty that the Congress party is used to, it may be blasphemous to say, but the fact is that the Congress party's only salvation today is being able to demonstrate democratic functioning. It does not matter what the price is, what the cost is. It does not matter who gets elected. Inevitably, if that process begins, then the process of salvation also begins. Yes, some senior leaders will lose out. Some of their expectations may not be fulfilled. But at the price of having to eliminate some young people, some old people, some unpopular people, the process of democratic functioning, whether it's in Punjab, whether it is in the new chaos that
I'm
is being
still
created in
curious to know
Chhattisgarh.
how you say it's a democratic process. In the case of Mr. Channi itself,
I'm saying,
once again, in the case
I'm
of Mr.
saying-
Channi itself, he was a compromise candidate. He was not somebody who had support of the majority of legislators.
The fact is that unless each of these processes can be publicly demonstrated to be popular processes, you will continue to emphasize that the party is spiraling downwards on account of, one, electoral losses, and two, bad structuring within the party.
The problem,
So
Pallavi,
there is no doubt
the
that
way
the only
they've
solution
handled
is
this,
more
the
democracy, not less.
ham-handed approach of the leadership in developments in Punjab is being very closely watched by Ashok Gehlot and Sachin Pilot in Rajasthan. Already in Chhattisgarh, I believe there are about a dozen odd supporters of Mr. Baghel who've come to Delhi. I mean, what is the takeaway for other chief ministers and chief ministers in waiting in other Congress-ruled states looking at the mess that's happened in Punjab? What are their takeaways?
I think Ashok Gehlot and Bhupesh Baghel, but more than that, Ashok Gehlot have a reason to smile, because this is exactly what they're going to say. They're going to say that when you remove veterans, those who understand politics, this is what happens. And, then they'll draw the same parallel. They'll say, okay, does Sachin Pilot have that kind of an experience, which, for example, I have? Does he have the support of so many MLAs as I have? So if you're going to do a Punjab and Rajasthan, there is going to be political instability. And mind you, parts of Rajasthan is also bordering. It's a border state in one particular way as well. You know, when this decision was first taken in Punjab, and we would speak to some of the leaders from, say, Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, they were actually saying, okay, fine, they mustered courage. This is a win-win situation for the Gandhi siblings, and they have shown that they are the boss. But who has lost out in the end, frankly speaking, is the Congress party. You know, I cover that party. When I go to a Congress headquarters, I see the huge crowd in the Congress lawns, and many of them just don't understand what's happening. If you start looking at the map, and Zaka, you are from that state in Kerala, which ideally should have been a stronghold for the Congress party. Rahul Gandhi is, after all, a member of parliament from there. The party is falling apart. The traditional vote banks are also turning their back to them in Kerala. Same is the situation what is happening in Karnataka. The fight between the DK Shiv Kumar camp and the Siddaramaiah camp. Rajasthan we know, Chhattisgarh we know. In state after state is the same story. So no one is now wanting to look at Congress as an alternative to the BJP in a single fight. And apart from that, Zaka, you have a belligerent social media who are pouncing in and they start attacking the leaders who want to speak out their mind. So it's like very messy when you interact with them.
I tell you what, there was a time when the Congress party was in power and it could do this, you know, balancing different factions. So you could bring somebody to the center and make him a central minister while somebody else is a chief minister. Right now, the biggest problem for the Congress party is they've been out of power, and frankly, the prospects of coming back to power look so bleak that all of these regional chieftains, satraps, if you will, are emboldened to do what they feel like the tantrum that Mr. Sidhu has thrown. Yes, he may have taken the moral high ground, and finally, you know, whether it's the chief minister or other high command, had to simply succumb to that tantrum and simply had to accede to his demands. Well, who's to say that tomorrow Sachin Pilot will not do the same thing, or T.S. Dio will not do the same thing, or the folks in Kerala that Pallavi was referring to will not do the same thing. After all, if Sidhu can get away with it, then why not the others? So that's a wrap. I'll catch you again tomorrow night at 9 o'clock for Brass Tacks. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.